I recently drew a sample SD40-2 cab, and today let's letter it and paint it into Union Pacific. Now, there are a few details to add to make it into a Union Pacific cab. First of all, let's add, there's a rotary beacon up here, and then there's an antenna, and then there's the horn. Actually, believe it or not, considering everything, the horn is actually one of the more places where I always feel a little bit of added focus on the horn, because the horn's an area where it stands out above the rest of the drawing, and if you make a tiny mistake somewhere else, paint covers it. But the horn is like, if you start erasing it, it just it's hard to kind of cover it up. So, and a lot of people focus on the horn, and there's so many types of horns. But anyways, those few details have been added. And anyways, a Union Pacific engine. There's the paint, the red paint separator stripe goes right about here. And keep practicing, as I always say. This stripe goes about there, and it's always good to have a separator stripe. Kind of helps divide the colors. And then I'm going to do SD40-2 3612, which is from the original number series. And as I've done in other things, other drawing demonstrations, it's good to kind of measure out a little bit, if nothing else, where the numbers go before you just start writing them in there. And 3612 is a good example of the fact that the 1, as I've said in other demonstrations, the 3, 6, and the 2 are one size, and then the 1's narrower. And actually, it's kind of nice at times to have 1s, and sometimes a few numbers like 7 is a good number, because some numbers you'll find over time in different font styles are more complex than others. Like 4s can be harder than others to do. And the Union Pacific font has a very distinct look. It's got a lot of sharp edges. And you might not have totally seen where I measured this out. But probably make it a little darker for you. There's the 3, that's where the 6 goes, the 1, and the 2. The 6 doesn't have quite as much of a tail on the top. And this space in between these numbers and then the 2. And see, one thing to sometimes consider, a lot of engines have different details, even like the 3611 could be different than the 3612. But if you totally run out of room, but on the writing 36 and you put the 1, sometimes you can do 3611 versus 3612. That's just sort of a little bit of advice, because a 1 can go in there much tighter than a 2. So that's just sort of number advice. Then the one last piece of lettering is the UP shield. And the thing about the UP shield is that this is something about lettering that you're probably right now saying, how are you going to make the UP shield down here? And this is just, in so much of this artwork, there are just essences. It's true of, like, there's all kinds of little bits of, like, cautionary things on doors. There's fire extinguisher markers. There's advice labels. There's white and red things on doors that are markers. And putting the essence of them on the engine, you'll see them from the distance. You're much better off if you just sort of put them on and maybe put a couple of little tiny dots. And if you just do that, it gives the essence of writing. And you're never going to be able to write like on a box car where it says the capacity and the load limit. You're not going to be able to write capacity and load limit. All the way to 30 years later, I can't write that. And putting the essence of it gives the feel of that. So anyways, the advice that I have here is to, and again, let's put just the essence of 3612 in the number board, and practice and practice and practice will do that for you. And I wrote that rather fast. And the advice I give you is, for instance, there's a red stripe there, but I would not paint that red stripe first. I would paint that last. And here, as you can see, I flipped this sideways, as I often do. The one thing about gray versus a lot of color, both gray and yellow are a little bit challenging in this sense, in that gray and yellow don't have a really good ballpoint pen to trim with. So they're actually fairly challenging colors. And in this small area, I can put a second coat on very quickly. And you'll notice, like, for instance, here in the horn, I mean, it's very small, but normally I would really recommend doing a horn with, sometimes, like, this is a bit of advice I would give, even though I did a little bit of it with the pen, especially as you're starting out. On a gray horn, I would almost recommend getting like a sort of a darker pencil. I use a 4H pencil to draw, but get a 3H pencil, which is a darker pencil. And I would do something like a horn with that, because you have much more control and you can erase. And instead of using ink, which can flow all over the place, that way your horn doesn't get just immediately too much ink on it. And while you're here, you could just very quickly, here, open the wrong end, you could very quickly just put a dab of orange into the rotary beacon. And the thing I recommend is, at times when you see things like the rotary beacon, it's actually a pretty good idea actually to put the dab of orange on that when you see it, because one, kind of gives you a moment's pause before you start painting the yellow, and two, a lot of times when you're done with the drawing, you end up, you're so kind of, excited to be done with the drawing that you'll end up that little tiny bits of detail like the rotary beacon, you might just not remember to put it on. And all of a sudden, I do that all the time. And then like when I go to scan the drawing to put it in a poster, I look and I'm like, oh, I didn't put the orange in the rotary beacon, and then I have to do it an hour later. So again, in this small of an area, I can put 2 coats of yellow. Don't really need 3 coats right here. On a whole engine, I would put 3 coats of yellow, but in this amount of space, 2 coats is probably enough because it saturates it. And what's basically left here is to do the red. And what I would recommend is to use, to this day, I still do a number of this size with a ballpoint pen, because the truth of the matter is, if you fill it in with the ink that you paint the engine, the numbers get a little too thick a little too quickly. And very quickly you might say, oh boy, I made that too quick, too thick, too quickly. So there's the number 3612. Then up here, let's put the separator stripe in red. That's again something that at times you might. And what it is that separator stripe, if it gets too close to the gray, it starts to not be quite as apparent. And then put your red stripes into the Union Pacific shield. And then over here, I'll start the blue. One thing that's always good is to kind of start your pen, especially in a real tiny little area like this, because the pens kind of need a fresh start. And then you kind of just, what you do is you just get the essence of this, so that from the distance you can see that there's the essence of letters, the essence of the stripes, because it is so small in the drawing. And similarly on the number board, as you practice, the essence of the 3612 gets sharper and sharper. But in the beginning, what you really are looking for is the essence of 3612 in the number board. And as you keep getting more and more practice with small little numbers and small letters, the essence of that will get sharper and sharper. And let me know what other SD40-2s or GP38-2s or any locomotives you'd like to see, cabs or other parts of the detail drawn. And it was great drawing an SD40-2 Union Pacific cab with you. And if you'd like to see more drawings, subscribe to my Andy Fletcher Trains YouTube channel and leave comments below about anything you like about the drawings.